Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Lakeside Drive. On this episode, not only do we review the greatest racetrack to ever see the light of day, but the best race of the year thus far, and a season that is shaping up to be one of the all-time greats. We are the Australian Pinion and a huge Australian bias on our drivers as well. So, welcome to the Belgian GP review. And joining us today is my friend and yours, Freya Brolsma. How are you? Have you been watching the Olympics? Have you been watching the rowing? Have you been watching the canoeing, the basketball, the archery, the shooting, and, of course, the Formula One?
Goodness me, Campy. If Formula One was an Olympic sport, I think my brain would explode. Hello, listeners. It's so good to be in your ears again for this excellent race review. As Campy said, yes, I absolutely have been watching the Olympics. I am very #grateful to be in the right time zone to be able to try and pick up most of it, not at 3 o'clock in the morning. So very pleased with that. But yeah, we did actually watch some archery. You joke, Campy, but we watched some archery yesterday. We watched, it was the Netherlands and somebody else for the bronze match yesterday. It's probably not called a match. I don't know. But my goodness, the hero of the day has to be Jess Fox. We watched that canoe final, and I was on the edge of my seat waiting for those times to come through after going through qualifying 8th and then coming out on top. Just an absolute star. She saved her performance for when she needed it. And of course, there's so many other absolute legends who've been competing and still to come as well. So I am absolutely loving it as much as I did this race on the weekend.
Yes, well, this race, before we jump into the race, let's just give us your 30-second take on how this race made you feel, and we'll get into some news and we'll go from there. Because
wants to talk about feelings.
I've never been so excited in the second half of a race in my life. Jeez, this is why we watch this sport. It is just shaping up to be one of the great seasons with... Yeah, Mercedes, I said it last week, they've been low-key performing very, very well and pulled one out of the bag last night. I don't think anybody expected to see what we did last night, but geez, it was good. So,
general feelings, there was a lot of yelling. There was a lot of excitement. There was some fist pumping. There was some spilt coffee. It was so good to watch. Like you said, it just gets you so excited about this sport again. Because not only was it a great race, it was at such an epic track, and with the beautiful day that they had and everything else, it was just everything kind of falling into place for an absolutely epic sporting event. So, no, I absolutely loved it. It gave us all the feels, and it's really set us off into the summer, excited for the second half of the season. This is a point of the season where we can start to feel a little bit jaded, a little bit cynical if there's been a lot of dominance, or just depending on what type of, hoo-ha has been going on in the first half of the season with various teams. Whereas I think this send-off has been really great. Obviously with the disqualification, it gives us a bit of a funny aftertaste, I'm sure, especially for people like Lewis Hamilton. But overall, you couldn't fault it. Just a great Formula One activity event.
Yeah, it was. All right, let's just get into the news just quickly. A few movements have been happening. There is a big move to be happening over the summer break, which is all but the decision's been made, all but confirmed, but we'll get to that. Where's Wally himself has been found. Mr. Matteo Binotto is back, and he's coming back to Audi. Thoughts, Freya?
Well, I mean, he seems like someone who you just can't keep away from Formula One, to be entirely honest.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's surprising that he's back in some kind of way, shape or form, but this is not necessarily what I expected, especially with Seidel and Audi. I was like, the whole German connection and everything else just made so much sense. But it is a really interesting move, especially when you consider that he is obviously the previous team principal of McLaren. I just start thinking a little bit about their performance under his direction there, and that they've made such an early move to take him out of Audi. I don't know what they have seen already when it comes to their establishing of the running and the business. Has it started giving them a bit of deja vu? Or is it just a matter of the fact that Binotto wasn't available when they started establishing these roles, and now he is available and they have just jumped on that when they can? Potentially a bit of both. But to me, it's somebody getting cold feet based on potentially his last role. So yeah, it was perhaps a bit surprising, but I think once you read it, not entirely shocking, if that makes any sense at all. With me,
No, it does make sense. Caught me offside a bit. Look, I know I'm in no position to make any value judgment on this. I just get the feeling that maybe Seidel is someone that has got a very good reputation in the paddock, and our expectations of him are probably more than what they deserve to be. And he's had that twice now at McLaren, and now moved on, and Audi's made the call. Not that I know. I couldn't tell you. I know absolutely nothing. I'm just speculating because it's what we do here as a conversation. But who would know? So it's a shame for him, but he'll find himself in the sport, a bit like everybody else. I think we'll see Gunther Steiner back, and anyway. And moving on to Renault. We had this long-winded, dragged-out conversation last week about Alpine and where they go, and, they've made some moves this week too, so it looks like Bruno Famin is to leave them by the end of August. He remains vice president of the motorsport division, and Renault intends to end its Formula One power unit supply, and most likely will take a Mercedes engine, so we'll still see them as an organisation on the grid, but they'll be a customer team, which is really look. They've had a great 20 years in the sport from an engine manufacturer perspective. I mean, they won 2 world championships as the works team. Then they ran into some problems with that works team and supplied Red Bull, and Red Bull won 4 of their 8 championships with them. So look, great engine manufacturers. They just haven't seemed to nail this turbo hybrid era. And it will be interesting. Now Merck will be that'll be the 5th team on the grid they're supplying out of 10. So that is, I think they would have been looking to join with an Andretti or a Cadillac or somebody else in the sport to partner with, but that just hasn't eventuated. I think they've just cut ties. So interesting to see what happens there.
In terms of the Merck supply, I'm not sure exactly what the timing of the power unit switch will be, if this is going to be for 2025 or 2026. I would suggest 2026. It seems like a big move to try and make ahead of our next season. So if it's going to be 2026, the Merck supply kind of run will change, because you've got Aston Martin, who won't have the Mercedes engine anymore. They'll be going to they'll have Ford, and so they'll have Honda. What am I saying? They'll have Honda, and then Ford is going to Red Bull. So actually Mercedes will kind of keep the same amount of customer teams that they have on the grid currently. But look, I think when it comes to Bruno Famin leaving, the way that he said it was that his role with Alpine, in terms of that VP role, with huge changes that they have going on within the organisation, and kind of this big project, which we won't go into a lot of detail into because we don't really care that much. But he has kind of said, look, it's all getting a bit blurry, and it's a huge role as it is. So I think, especially with the addition now of their new executive advisor, Campy, your favourite friend, it's just too big a role. And I think he's in there now saying this is how we're going to do things. And I think Bruno Famin is probably fairly happy to step aside. It's not giving up a highly lucrative winning position. Let's be clear. It comes with a lot of complicated problems to solve at this point of their kind of racing experience, to be honest. So I don't think he'll necessarily be that sad to be leaving this role. The question is who they put in and when, because they've been here before. We came back week after week doing race reviews saying, have they got a team principal yet? No. How do you expect to perform when you don't have clarity of leadership? And so my question is, how long do they take to sort themselves out? Potentially, again, with a new advisor, he might be able to sort things out pretty quickly. We all know he's a wheeler and dealer, so he might be able to get somebody into that role faster. But I suppose we'll all have to wait and see after summer.
Will we see a return of Cyril Abiteboul? Maybe. And we've had rumours of Toyota coming back into the sport as well. So I'm not sure that investment from Ryan Reynolds and co. has been the best investment they've ever made, but the potential of the sport and the growth we've seen and the opportunities for manufacturers to come in since the takeover from Liberty Media at the end of Bernie's reign, I think it's a bit more of an attractive. Jeez, I've done it again. Listener, what a disaster. It's a bit more of an attractive place to come because under Bernie's reign, it was very much an iron fist. It was what Bernie got. What he wanted, he got. So it's a bit more open. So we could see potentially 7 or 8 manufacturers on the grid, which would be great to see with some great independent teams like Williams and McLaren moving forward. But let's get on to the race. Let's quickly, anthem this week. Excellent. Didn't hear the flyover. That young girl that sung that, mate, she would have made her dad very, very proud. What an excellent rendition. Not the greatest anthem we've ever seen by all counts, but geez, a cappella is always great. She was excellent. We had a flyover too, but we didn't hear them because they've decided to change the way they do sound now. So it's you only hear the sound coming directly out of the microphone and not the room microphones or the microphones that would pick up all the sound of the flyover. So that was a shame. But Freya, let's get into your Discord comment of the week for us, our favourite part of the episode.
Our Discord is a fantastic place to be during race weekends in particular, and this weekend delivered in the same way that it always delivers. Mine this weekend is in reference, obviously, after Oscar Piastri came in red hot to his pit stop, which we will talk about later. After that happened, Tilly Willie said, put that Jackman in State of Origin. And I couldn't agree with you more. He would be well placed because he absorbed so much force in that, and we'll talk about it later. But love the overly Australian reference there too. So apologies to our international listeners who are not aware of State of Origin. But we loved that, Tilly Willie. Thank you.
Did. All right, mine is from this is on debut today from Daniel. Well, I haven't seen a lot of Daniel's comments before, but this is my one from him last night. It said, in my best campy voice ever, I quote, I've never been so glued to the timing screens of my left watching DR. This is my experience watching Formula One. Is literally trying to see the gaps, whether he's moving up forward. And I was trying to watch Daniel. I was trying to watch Ocon catching him last night. I was trying to watch Piastri on Leclerc and Hamilton and the crew at the end. Jeez, I was glued to that side screen. I think if we can figure out a way with the F1 Pro app to have 2 screens open at the one time so we can watch timing and the race, that would be great too. But hey, we're moving on. So let's get into our team by team analysis. We will start at the back and we will go to Sauber. Valtteri Bottas, 14th and 15th. They bought some qualified 14th, finished 15th. Zoe didn't qualify very well, dead last, and had some issues very early on the race with his power unit. They bought a lot of upgrades this week. New floor fences, front rings, rear wings, more efficient beam wing, as well as changes to the geometry of the mirrors, all designed to improve flow quality over the rear end of the car. How'd you see their race play out, Frat?
I mean, you wouldn't know that they had all those upgrades, unfortunately, because they seem to be exactly where they always are every weekend. Look, the greatest thing to come out of Sauber this weekend was Bottas's social media, which is usually the case. Again, there's comfort in predictability, if nothing else. He did some great Olympic testing content for Instagram, which was just the greatest. He just keeps giving the people what they want this year, at least off track for sure. Look, they are where they are. There's not that much to say. I think obviously we're still waiting for the second seat here to be confirmed for next year. And in my opinion, I don't think Joe's done enough to really retain that seat. I would be pretty surprised if we see him on the grid. It's such a tricky one though, right? Because he hasn't done anything wrong. He just hasn't had an opportunity to show us what he's capable of. So it's not to say that he hasn't done anything wrong, hasn't necessarily done anything right either. It just is where he is. And we all know that Bottas could be further up the grid. So if he's only ever, a couple of tenths behind his teammate, then maybe he's capable of greater things as well. It's such a tough position for him to be in. I think that he hasn't had the opportunity to show us what he can do.
I would suggest Joe's form probably this year has probably been the worst year results-wise he's had in Formula One. Whilst at other times in his career in these previous 2 seasons, up against Valtteri Bottas, he's been super competitive and right there in qualifying, beating him on a number of occasions and quite regularly. It's been a quite tussle. This year, it seems to me that Bottas has definitely ticked the box in both qualifying and race pace and general overall performance as well. Unfortunately, that team's just struggled. I mean, in Melbourne, we saw the problems they had with pit stops, and that was going to be for the next 6 races and wasn't going to be finished till Montreal at the time or something. So, disastrous for that team. I think we'll see Valtteri on the grid next year. He still hasn't signed yet, but I think he's got that set. It's just a matter of who will be driving next to him moving forward. So we'll move on to Williams now. Geez, their car looked very, very quick on the straights. We know this car runs a lot of low downforce just in its design philosophy. So on a track like this, very slippery on the Camel Straight, and I thought they were going to probably do a bit better than what they put on track in the end. But Sargent qualified 19th, Albon in 11th, probably a bit unlucky not to make Q3 for Albon, and finishing positions were 17th and 12th for Albon, was just out of the points. Really got beaten by the 2 Aston Martins and Danny Rick in that V-carb moving forward. So, well, how'd you see their race sum up? If you could sum it up in, give us 5 words for it. Put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
5 words for Williams. Hoped for more. I'll give it to you in 3. Mostly for Albon. I thought he had pretty high potential of being in the points alongside what ended up being Danny Rick. He didn't quite have that race pace in comparison to, as it turns out, the Alpine and the RB as well. But look, he's getting himself into reasonable qualifying positions. He's doing the best that he can to put himself into a solid place to start the race from. So I don't think we can really fault that. This is probably the limitations of this car at the end of the day. They just are where they are when it comes to all of the teams. But from a Sargent perspective, he started to show us a little bit of something over the last couple of races. It doesn't feel like he's been quite as far behind as we've seen earlier in the season and in previous seasons. So I don't think it's enough to save his career necessarily, especially when you've got the likes of Carlos floating around looking for a seat. He just doesn't compare, unfortunately. But hopefully, at the very least, it means that he can finish his time with Williams in a slightly more upbeat kind of experience, and having felt like he's really done what he can and had a slightly more enjoyable time as he sees out probably the second half of the season with Williams.
Just put a note in that little part of the clip so it can get edited out. It just dropped out and the dog was barking too. So I'm sorry for that.
Why don't you jump to Haas, because I think we missed them.
Yeah, we did. Sorry, I'd stuffed that completely, and I missed the plug for the hats, but I'll work that in there somewhere.
Do it later.
Mention my beanie. Yeah. All right. Moving next to Haas, our American team, and Hulk, who's probably had the best season of his career from that I remember anyway, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years. So this team probably didn't perform the way they wanted to perform. I think it was probably just track specific them. They're an overall very car, and I think on this track you need to be pretty extreme in a couple of his areas in order to do well. But qualified in 16th and 17th respectively, Hulk and Mag, and then 18th for Hulk in the race, and K-Mag, all things considered, jumped some places, moved up the grid and finished 14th. So I think for me, K-Mag, his race was really dictated to by what everybody else did and his strategy. So he was one of these early pitters and managed to jump them and hold them off. And we saw this DRS train. It wasn't as overpowered as we've seen before, but geez, that front 8 cars, and then you had the 9th right back through to the car 20. It was really about strategy. And if you could get 5 laps of clean air, that would set your race up set your whole race up for the end of it. I think K-Mag got that right. I think Hulk's performance wasn't greatest, but I'll just put that down to strategy and just have one of those weekends. The reality is, in this sport and the level and the capability of all the drivers across the grid, I think, you make a mistake like that, like some of just the general lack of pace and get strategy wrong, pitting 1 or 2 laps early, then it just falls away for you.
Well, yeah, and like you said, this was almost a bit of a tale of 2 races within the pack for that exact reason, in that you kind of had those first, I suppose, 9 cars all being dictated to by whoever was up the front of that pack, and then the same went for the rear of the field, and K-Mag did kind of have that for those rear gunning cars. Look, Hulkenberg, like you said, look, he's sitting 11th in the championship at the moment. He's on equal points with Yuki Tsunoda, but sits just ahead of him. So the only teams ahead of him are Aston Martin, Mercedes, Red Bull, McLaren, and Ferrari in terms of individuals. So he's very much put them pretty solidly behind Aston Martin, which is probably about right based on his overall performance. I think they may start seeing themselves slipping back a bit the second half of the year. I wouldn't mind betting that your RBs in particular, and potentially even some performances from some of the other teams, but the RB in particular, I think probably will overtake them going into the second half of the season. So, look, it's an interesting one. I think, like you said, K-Mag just got himself into the right position to be able to make the calls and keep those final cars behind him, and really benefited from that. But when you're racing for 14th, 15th position, you can see what works. To be honest, you don't have that much to lose, and so it was good to see that they tried that with him.
Yeah, it was clear that the hard tyre was clearly the car to be on for a race pace compound for the way the race played out. Those who were stuck on the mediums, even Max probably didn't get it quite right in that. I think it was the second stint that the Haas went to maybe they did 2 runs on the medium. Someone fact check me, please, but it just didn't seem like the right thing. Moving on to Alpine, this is the team that we have skipped over a bit in the last 5 or 6 podcasts, because we found ourselves repeating the same thing every weekend. This weekend in Belgium, they seem to have found a bit. I think the car performed really, really well in the wet. We had Gasly qualifying 12th and finishing 13th, but Ocon, he qualified in 10th, got himself through to Q3, started 9th with Max's penalty, and showed some genuine pace in that car that I don't think we've seen. We've probably only seen it 1 or 2 times this year. And he, again, when this car is ready to perform, it's got some pace, he spanked Gasly, in my opinion. And I think he did. He spanked him. He good. And really, when you look at it, he had a good race. He was passed by Alonso and Aston Martin and Max Verstappen off the start. So, good weekend for Ocon moving forward. They also bought a whole lot of upgrades that seem to work this weekend. We'll get a genuine perspective on what that looks like when we after the break. But Ocon also signed this week, and it was confirmed that he's moving to the I've gone blank. Where's he going next year?
So he's going to Haas alongside Ollie Beerman, which will be a very interesting experience. I think I've said on the podcast before, when it comes to Ocon's position there, I wonder how much having a rookie driver has almost kind of allowed that seat to be open for him, because I don't think in many of the other teams who have established drivers, I don't think that seat was available for Ocon based on the other drivers' willingness to race alongside him in a lot of ways. Not that they have the final decision making, but they have a huge influence, obviously. But so look, I don't know what to say. He would not have been my pick if I was going to, if I had my own Formula One team, he would not be my pick to put in that seat and it's partially because you've got a rookie alongside him. You're wanting that person to be able to learn as much as they can from their more experienced counterpart. So I would be looking at a Valtteri Bottas. I would be looking at a Carlos Sainz. Now, potentially they tried to get them and neither of them were interested. I don't know, but that's just not who I would be wanting a first-year Formula One driver to be learning from alongside. So that's just such an interesting call from my perspective. But then at the same time, you to try and see the other side of it. He has pace on occasion. He doesn't crash all the time. Sometimes he does into his teammates, but he's not the most temperamental of the temperamental bunch that we see. So maybe when it comes to wanting an experienced set of hands, he's not the worst option out there, but he's certainly not the best in my view. This weekend was interesting. Like you said, he had genuine pace, and we saw that when he came up to Daniel Ricciardo, although he had much fresher tyres as well.
Yep.
By the time he came to overtaking him, like you said, they had a bunch of upgrades, front wing engine covers, beam wing, rear wing, brake ducts, mirror designs, all trying to combine low downforce configurations with overall kind of improvement to airflow. But at the same time, and so if that is what has helped him to find pace here, that's great, because usually you don't really see the effect of those types of upgrades for a couple of races because they need to really understand how they're working. These are slightly different, but it can take a couple of races to understand the impact of that. We've seen that with Aston Martin, obviously, in the past, bringing upgrades, they're not working, and then they've got to try and figure out why they're not working or which one is not working, and try and, it's like, trying to find a needle in a haystack when you bring so much at once. Some of these upgrades are a bit different. They're a bit more straightforward than some of the technical ones, but the other problem with Gasly, though, he said from the start he had engine temperature issues, couldn't steer properly, he was struggling with his brakes, so potentially had a few gremlins in that car that he was struggling to kind of navigate with over the course of the race. But hey, he finished, which didn't retire the car, which hasn't always been the case. So probably happy with that.
He's a driver, Ocon, that came onto the grid as a young guy, started with Racing Point and promised a lot. He was in that Mercedes during their domination period. He's in that junior development team, and he missed out. He missed a year in the sport, remember? And Toto said, "I'll guarantee that you'll get back onto the grid somewhere." And he had to be released from that, and he went to Renault, and he had that year with Danny Rick. I think it was the second year Danny Rick was there, and it seemed like he lost a hell of a lot of pace, or it was just because Danny Rick was a way better driver. He got this long-term deal from Alpine that we were genuinely shocked about at the time. And, I think he's had the better of Gasly for the races that they've driven him comfortably. And
he's a point behind him in the championship, but yep.
I don't care about championship points when you're talking about the back market teams, because the reality is they can have a race where they get fifth, and it's out of the ordinary and things happen. But the reality is it's about how many times you get those cars into the points for me. So I'm not fussed about that, but comfortably race and qualifying, he's outperformed him over the whole time he's been there. So he's probably done well to get on the grid. He wouldn't have been my first choice, not my second, probably not my third, probably my fourth after that. But good on him. Good on him. He'll be there, and you do need a French driver just to poke a bit of fun out on the grid too. And without Gasly, Ocon's the only one. So Gasly will be there next year too. But all right, let's talk about our boy RB and Danny Rick. Now, listen out there. This will be the most...
This is going to be the rest of the podcast.
I can confirm that Lakeside Drive, and me and Freya, I'm going to throw Jim under the bus here. James got off the Danny Ricciardo train about 6 races ago. And that was when we stayed. It was for his own mental health, but that's where we stayed true and completely one-eyed towards our boy. And he will be. It is all but confirmed at the moment. I think the decision's been made. He left that track last night, all those post-race interviews. He left the happiest man on the planet. this was Danny Rick of old, 2015, 16, big smile, competing, top step of the podium regularly, and he is back and he'll be in that team. But let's talk through his performance and what do you think will happen for him over the summer break.
So starting with this weekend, let's talk about this weekend for a minute before we look forward. I was messaging you guys after Q2. I was so mad. They just didn't get his timing right in order for him to get that last lap in. And that's obviously when the times just start tumbling as people push in their final lap before to get through to Q3. I was so frustrated at that because he absolutely had the pace, I think, to get through to Q3. Just didn't get that final lap in, which was just extremely frustrating to watch. But so he qualified 13th, finished in 10th after the disqualification. George Russell was promoted into the points, which is great, but otherwise finished 11th. Just lost out to Ocon in those last couple of laps, which was frustrating again to watch. But again, Ocon had fresher tyres, and it was what it was. I think overall, actually, that was a pretty great performance. We definitely saw some fiery kind of driving from DR, which we obviously love to see. Seemed to have a little bit more confidence in the car this weekend in comparison to previous ones. It's not a rocket ship by any means, but it just felt like he was working more with what he had, was my thought. This weekend in particular. What did you see in his race before we talk about the rest of the year?
Well, he got pinched off the start. I think he was started on the softs, only got to start on the softs, which automatically we knew he's going on a two-stopper. And I think that the way this race played out, it gave them options. So they got that right. He got pinched on the inside and he was right up Max's gearbox into turn one. And then because he didn't have the traction to drive out of it, he got flanked by, I think it was Bottas and somebody else. But I was a bit worried, but they pitted him early, and that enabled him to undercut 3 or 4 cars. And then by lap 22, they pitted him again for that, that half race distance hards as well. Ideally, and that allowed him to get clean air for the 5 or 6 laps that he needed. So he undercut, everybody in that DRS train that he was stuck in, and that's what gave him. Ultimately, if he could have held on to that second set on the mediums for another 5 or 6 laps, I don't think he would have got. He wouldn't have got that clean air with Schnorr and jump. He would have come back out in a train. It would have ruined his race, which is why he lost out to Ocon at the end. Again, qualifying, super frustrated, but they did say they expected rain to come at the end of Q2 and times too slow. So they went for the information they had, the decision they made the right call. But the reality is that guys improved right up until he finished his last flying lap with 2 minutes still on the clock. So that says a bit about what they thought was going to happen. So I don't mind that. But, geez, I was stoked for him. He was, he's qualifying now is 5.9 to Yuki Tsunoda. And if you give the 3 sprint races we've had him, it's 7.10. And races are bang on even. But if you look at the way Danny Rick started this and probably post-Montreal as a race, there was one outlier in there, which was probably, I think it was Silverstone, where he didn't do too well. That was the outlier race in the last 6 races that we've had. I think he's performed very, very well. The team's very happy. He's a very happy boy after the race. There's some videos and some pictures put up of him and his conversation with Christian. And
so that's it, right? Now we talk about going into the summer. So we've talked about this weekend. We go about what's happening next. And this is what is making us, if you're kind of saying, where are you getting this information from? Everywhere, basically. And then we turn it into total delusion in our heads because that's what we do best. But there's just too many little snippets coming out from multiple pages with people asking him questions like, how are you going to spend your summer? And this grin emerges before he's even had the chance to think about what his answer is going to be, which is actually going back to Australia for a bit and then coming back to train in Europe. But this grin comes out, and then there was a couple of other videos. The same thing happened. Then there's Max posting him and Danny Rick flying off into the summer in their helicopter afterwards. Then there was the video of DR with Laurent Mehis and Christian Horner. That one felt a bit sus to me because you can go and have a conversation anywhere you please in the paddock. James can tell you all about it, but they chose to do it in a spot which was accessible by somebody's camera. So I don't know. That to me is like almost like trying to leak something. But the one which actually gave it away was on the AlphaTauri, the RB socials, where they said, "Can you tell us about what your summer break is going to be?" And this, like, it's like watching something spread, something spread across
the shit-eating grin was huge.
Comes out, and then luckily Yuki actually jumps in and answers first because I think otherwise DR would have just been sitting there giggling for 30 seconds before he said, "Oh yeah, I'm going back to Australia." It's just he knows something and he's got no poker face. Like, just there's too many things like that giving us the vibes.
Yeah, well, I think look, Yuki's had a good year, but he's not in contention for that seat. I think the comments that we've seen from Helmut Marko about RB being a feeder team, I think they all make sense. Yeah, Sergio is the one in this that they've got to pull the move on, and he just hasn't performed to go from second when he was really lucky to get through to Q3 this weekend. He got in by 3/1000ths, and if a couple of teams had nailed that strategy right correctly in Q2, like your Danny Rick, who would have, got his lap in on the last minute. He was lucky to get P2, but he pulled the lap out. But the race pace just wasn't there. That last stint, he dropped a lot of time. I know he got sacrificed a bit so Max could get in front of him, but the reality is he's not cutting it. And to score under 30 points in the last 7 races in that car and the position that RB is in, they've got to make the call. I think the call's been made. They're just going to announce it, and Danny Rick will be back. Does Danny Rick get a contract for next year? Well, he's got half a year to prove himself. Do they bring Liam Lawson in, or for next year straight to the top team? Does Sergio drop back, or do they give Sergio 6 months off to go and assess his options and then bring him back next year? Who knows what's going to happen? But what?
Yeah, look. I think the thing is though, logically, I mean, it's a tricky one because logically you look at Yuki's points, and I can understand if you're a Yuki fan and you're looking at where he is and how he's performed this year, I completely understand why you'd be annoyed that he's not getting the call up. But it's not just about this season. It's about their history to this season as well. And as we spoke about last week, he's lucky to be here after his performance over the last couple of years. And he's just not the right match for that team. And I think everyone can see that, even though sometimes it's hard to put your finger on why. It's just not right temperament for the Red Bull team, I think, is potentially what they're thinking. Liam Lawson is not ready for the Red Bull seat, and Red Bull have a history of cooking their young drivers because they put them in positions that they're not ready for. It would be a mistake to put Liam Lawson in the Red Bull seat for that reason. Checo is not working out, as you said, and I feel for Checo because I think, and I've had this conversation with a few people over the last couple of weeks, it really feels like he's in his own head and has kind of spiraled, and it's very hard to pull yourself out of that. I think once you are so deep, it is possible, obviously, but that doesn't seem to be happening. RB is meant to be a feeder team, essentially, and so it doesn't make sense for Daniel Ricciardo to be holding up that seat. So, and then on top of that, they have to release Liam Lawson in September if they haven't given him a seat in a Red Bull team yet. So they have to let him go looking for other seats, and he will be a very attractive prospect to multiple of the teams who haven't signed a second driver yet. So if they haven't put him in a seat by September, they have to let him go elsewhere. They're not going to want to do that. So it makes sense based on the options available to them to put Danny in the Red Bull, bring Liam in for the second half of the season. You both get 6 months to do your best, and then they'll sort out next year at the end of this season. I would love for him just to be given the 2025 drive as well, but I don't think it will happen. The problem then, of course, is that, what is it, 8 races in the second half of the season? That's actually not that long to come to grips with a new car, new team, everything else. Now, obviously, he's already a bit immersed in it in comparison to other drivers. So hopefully he can make what he will of that. But at the very least, he will have given it a red hot crack. And if he can't make that happen in the Red Bull, then he'll probably say, that's me done. I think it will be a shame if they don't give him that chance. But based on everything we've just said, it's the logical thing to do.
Yeah. And just for all you internet haters out there, we are the only ones on the internet to remain faithful to Danny Rick. The only ones. I've been extremely frustrated with his form too, but I think he's done. The bare minimum that he's needed to achieve in this RB. He's driven well in the last 5 or 6 races. Before that, probably didn't perform where he needed to be in order to get his. He's done the bare minimum to get into that RB team, and I think he will. So, unfortunate for Perez. May just have. Well, that's what happens. Drivers have to draw a line on their chapter. He's had a chance he's had his chance to win 4 world championships or 3, and hasn't done it thus far. He's been up against Max in an organisation that is geared totally towards one person. And it's unfortunate, but when you have your opportunities, you've got to make them. And as I continue to say, Danny Rick in that car is like, in an RB, is like the Immaculate Conception. There are crazy good things that happens when those two things meet. And I cannot wait to see Danny Rick do another shoey before this season is out, and hopefully gets a drive into next year. But who knows? Let's just get through the summer break and enjoy what the rest of the year has for Danny Rick. So exciting. Let's take a quick break and we'll be back in a second. And we're back. All right, let's quickly talk about Aston Martin, and then we can get into the top 8 drivers that dominated this race. And Aston Martin, I've said it before, I'll say it again, they are the definition of no man's land at the moment. Alonso qualified well, started 9th, finished 8th. And Stroll, 15th, qualified, finished outside the points. He was trying to hold off Danny Rick, but Danny Rick just tires, and their strategy was a bit better. Alonso had a great race pace compared to Stroll over the duration of the race. Stroll had some issues in practice, had a crash and brought out a red flag. I think it was P2 it was in the wet. So tough weekend for them, but again, they are nowhere near where they want to be in terms of the top 4 teams, and they are probably the better car than the other 5 teams or 4 teams behind them, and that's it. So that's where they sit.
When you say no man's land, I think their position in the constructors very much explains exactly that. So they're 5th in the constructors at the moment on 73 points. Behind them is RB on 34 points, so pretty solidly behind. Yeah. And then above them is Mercedes on 266 points. So they're literally just running their own race in between these kind of, top 4 teams and everybody else. It's a bizarre position for them to be in. And like you said, it's not going to be a position that they want to be in, or is it necessarily getting them excited for the remainder of the season? But I think let's go on to our next team, which funnily enough is Red Bull.
Red Bull. Well, let's talk about him. Max. Jeez, that guy off the line is incredible. He's a racer. He made up those, 3 positions to get into 8th in the first 3 laps. And strategy slowly got him back to 4th. I was surprised he didn't get to 3rd. Sorry, he did get Leclerc in the end. So he, qualified in pole. His pace was outrageously quick in the wet on day 2, and he clearly had the pace compared to everybody else. Now, Red Bull, interestingly enough, have always taken engine penalties at this race because of that reason. It's easy to pass on. So I think it was an incredible drive from Max. He was under pressure the whole time and did very well to get where he did. I think they sacrificed Perez in a bit of strategy to let him in front and block cars behind him, but held off Norris for that last stint, which was pretty impressive. And kudos to him. He left and he extended his world championship lead over Norris through beating him, and Red Bull lost some points in the constructors. But how'd you see it play out?
Yeah, look, I think Max said himself afterwards, gone are the days where Max can just storm through from 11th to win the race. He has too many teams now matching his race pace or the Red Bull's potential race pace. And then you do just have Max, which is the X factor, but that's not enough when it comes to kind of raw pace with some other decent drivers ahead of you. So as much as you'd obviously never write him off when he's starting out of position, at the same time, we're not going to see him just steam through the way he used to. You know, even when Max was in 11th, you know, the same thing happened last year. He took a grid penalty last year, and you just see him come storm. You'd still say Max is going to win, you know. So, but that's not where we stand anymore. That's not the narrative of this season when it comes to that team's progress and his ability to extract everything that he can out of that car. The other thing which is interesting is that they did well this weekend, but I don't think they executed everything perfectly. And we kind of talked about this last weekend, where we used to see them get every single component that is required to perfection every single weekend, whereas now we're seeing sometimes one of those components slip, sometimes two. Last weekend it was most things other than Max, and even he didn't seem to be in his best form. So they are in a much more precarious position in comparison to other teams, especially when Max starts out of position. As you said, though, with Perez having started in second position, obviously if Max came up the back of him, they were going to give Max track position. We completely understand why. But at the same time, starting in second, you just look at Perez and you go, great, you've done what you needed to do in qualifying. Now you need to deliver in the race. Convert that. This is such an opportunity for you to silence the haters. And it just didn't happen. So I really felt for him in this race, because he just was given such a great opportunity to make the most of, and unfortunately it's just not how it played out. So it was frustrating to see, but like you said, it was interesting to see Verstappen with Norris behind him. It was just, you know, that's incredible driving. He gave us some good stuff to watch this weekend along with many of the other drivers.
I think this is how we will see a lot of the season play out. I think the top four teams, particularly Red Bull and McLaren, then I think it's at the moment it's Mercedes and Ferrari. That's the pecking order. But I think we will see the way the races play out, qualifying and the start of the race becomes imperative. If you've got pole position, you get off the line, you get in front of these guys. I don't think these cars are quick enough to pass each other on track unless there's a massive discrepancy in tyres. And I think the way that the rest of the year plays out will be dependent on qualifying and that first lap and the ability to pass people when you can, or that one lap pressure and to get pole positions. On that, and what we've seen this year, I think Max is probably the car. I think that gap's probably way too big. We're not seeing cars crash out like they used to. We're not seeing mechanical failures like we used to, where teams could make massive jumps. The reality is the way these cars are built, designed, and engineered, they really, really break down compared to what we used to see in yesteryear. So that's where it's going to play out. And if Norris wants to make a genuine world championship, he's got to beat Max in every qualifying session and beat him off the line. Max is always going to be second or third with, you know, a very quick car on him, and they are going to go to races where the RB is miles ahead of everybody else, just because it'll be track specific, but there'll be 2 or 3 tracks that are coming up that the car will just be better than everything else, just because of the advanced development they've had and just the way they started off the year. And it'll come back to them too. McLaren and Mercedes have made massive gains. Red Bull will make some gains at some stage this year as well. So let's next up Ferrari. For me, I was real disappointed. I think Sainz could have, knowing what we know now, I think Sainz could have genuinely made a one-stop, you know, and what could have been for him, or just they seem to lack a bit of race pace. Leclerc obviously finishing third, got that podium, held off Max and Lando behind him for that seemingly massive last stint. Geez, that move. I thought he fought Piastri really well. I thought they just had a really good all-round weekend. They seemed to be massively off the pace on day one, day two. Practice 3, they weren't right there, but geez, Leclerc pulled out a lap in the wet. that just came from nowhere that nobody expected. They saved it right to the last minute and they got the strategy right. Track conditions in qualifying allowed him to get that move on into P2 and ultimately start on pole. So good weekend for them. We haven't seen a lot from Ferrari probably since Monaco, since he won that race. So interesting. I think Sainz has out-qualified him the last 3 races. So for Leclerc to perform the way he did this weekend, I think it was good. Just a bit of it's lighting the fire in the belly of Ferrari again.
Yeah, I mean, he needed it. He really did need it this weekend. It was starting to get pretty sad to watch. What is it about poor Chuck? He just seems to be the most unlucky driver that we have out on the grid at the moment. But it was so interesting because you have, and it's just how brutal this sport can be, where you have the highs of Monaco, multiple. What is the plural of Monaco? Monaco, apparently. You have the absolute highs of Monaco, which will be the peak of his career, I'm going to say, because unless Ferrari start establishing some consistency, he's not going to win a Drive World Championship. So that genuinely is probably going to be the peak of his career. But even just so quickly after
and going up against Lewis Hamilton next year too, so...
Precisely. Going up against Lewis Hamilton is exactly right. It's going to make a huge difference in terms of what he's probably likely to achieve. But to fall so quickly and have so many weekends in a row where it's just disappointment after disappointment. So it was timely. I think he needed it. Like you said, it does reestablish some morale in the team and everything else to show him back up the front again. It would have been great to actually see, obviously hindsight, all of those things, to see Hamilton, Piastri and Leclerc on the podium together, I actually think would have been really fun because it's just so unexpected at this point of the season. So especially to have those 3 together, that would have been great to see. But yeah, like you said with Sainz, and as you said though, he's probably kicking himself about not thinking harder about the one stop. But the same goes for Piastri. The same goes for many of the other teams out there who probably thought, can we do it? No, maybe, no.
Yeah. Yep. Next up, we're moving to McLaren now. Let's talk about our boy, Oscar Piastri. Oh, this kid's starting to fire me up. He's not Danny Rick to us. He's not. But I'll tell you what, he's starting to get me there. Jeez, I was stoked for him last weekend, got his first weekend. He was comfortably faster than Norris all weekend. If you look at the times in practice sessions and Q1 and Q2, he had 3 or 4 tenths on his teammate. Unfortunately for him, he stuffed up on his hot lap in Q3 and I think it was into Baldwin. He just put his right rear onto the gravel. Probably lost him 2.5, 3 tenths just because of that. And Lando was in order to beat him. But geez, I love the start. Geez, the kid's just composed that move. He got the move on Lando, and I don't think race pace is an issue for him anymore. He has gotten faster in not just one lap, but race pace, and managing tyres has been probably his Achilles heel, although he's only 35, 36 races into his Grand Prix career. That has been his Achilles heel compared to his teammate. We didn't see it a lot last week. We didn't see it this today either. Maybe he's figured out, turn the page, his future is bright. That move he did on Leclerc was just... They're the sort of passes and moves that suggest to people that he can drive right on the edge and millimetres between the best drivers in the world, and those other drivers had that respect for him too. So they will race him a lot harder, knowing that he won't make stupid decisions. And the one thing I'll say about him, and it's just a small 1%er, last week we saw him run wide during the race and he lost his 4-second lead. It was plummeted. This weekend, he made that mistake in the pit stop and just went too far over his marks, and the jack man caught him. If he had have got those 2 things right and they didn't occur, I think we might have seen a very different result for him this weekend, and dare I say, he might have won 2 on the trot. So we're only talking about 2 seconds, but in the context of the race and where that was at, that 2 seconds probably could have got him an extra lap and a half, maybe even 2 laps to fight the Mercedes at the end. So stellar form, very excited for this kid, very excited for his future. He's got a tough opponent in Lando. Lando's driving well, but I tell you what, Oscar, at some stage, this year and next year will be the number one driver in that team. And Lando will have to go walkabouts to get that world championship that he wants, because Oscar is an incredible talent.
He is an incredible talent. Like you said, he's so early in his career and he is showing glimpses of that mastery that you see from people who have had significantly more experience. And as you said, I think it's actually a really important point to know that people can race him as hard as is appropriate for, the last laps for a win, and they know that he's not going to do something stupid. We've heard it on the radio, so we know that it's other drivers who are up the front of the grid have that reputation amongst other teams. We've heard it when in reference to George Russell, we've heard it in reference to Yuki, we've heard it in reference to lots of drivers, that they can become somewhat erratic when they're under pressure for podiums and wins. And what we've seen from Oscar is he doesn't have that. There are still moments, as you've said, that he just needs. It'll be interesting to understand what goes on there for him, whether it is, last weekend or qualifying, just loses it in these moments. And is that inattention for a half a second? Is that just him in the car putting it on the edge, and that's where it was, and he kind of went a bit over that? It's hard to know, obviously, from the outside looking in, but he's shown us more than enough to suggest that he lives up to the very high expectations that people put onto him when he came into this sport. Like, that's not an easy position to be in, with everybody coming in saying you've flown through F3, F2, and you're going to be this future world championship. Yeah. That's a huge amount of weight to carry on your shoulders when it comes to the expectation. And I think with him is a couple of things. One, his temperament, again, just lends itself to calmness and professionalism. The other thing is that as we know and we talked about before, he does work behind the scenes when it comes to how his mindset for these situations. And so I just think he's exceptionally primed for when he gets more experience under his belt and has the backing of a team to really prioritize him. He and Norris are in a interesting position with that team, which we spoke about last week after that drama. Piastri crossed the line 1.1 second behind George Russell, who won the race. If you, like you said, those tiny little seconds during the race do matter. And I think probably 5 races ago, I would say Piastri is not bothering Norris from his nervousness or the kind of factors that he thinks about going into a race. I think that is starting to shift. The question is whether or not the team will back him in as well, which may not happen this year, but next year, when the drivers' points reset, that would be a very different question.
Oh, interesting. Now, if you've been living under a rock for the last 12 to 16 hours and you haven't heard that George Russell and his amazing drive last night, he's been disqualified since the race. He passed all of the weights, correct weights after the race, but once they removed the 2.8 litres of fuel after the race, he was 1.8 kilograms under the required 798 kilogram minimum. So therefore, he was disqualified. Big shame for him. I did, the last thing I expected was for Hamilton to control the race he did, the way he did off the start, all the way. Even further in my mind was when George said, we can take this on a one-stop, because Norris is 6 seconds up the road. I'm doing the math in my head. I'm like, loses 20. I mean, he's got to make up 14 seconds on new tyres on a track that's 2 minutes long. I'm going, no, minute 48, minute 50. There's no way he will be able to hold on. But his ability to manage that tyre and extract the pace out of it, and then to still have something left to fight with when Hamilton eventually got up to him with 3 laps to go. I thought it was an incredible drive, great strategy, genius. The tyre whisperer, I think they were calling him on the over the pit wall. So, how'd you see his race? Drive for me, big shame. Lewis ends up winning because he's disqualified. But tell us what you think.
Well, I mean, I would have loved to have seen you trying to do algebra in your head. That would have seen your beanie shoot off like a rocket, I think, in the middle of the race. But it was, yeah. Look, it's incredible instincts from the driver based on what he can feel in the car. And I think this is something that can be hard to wrap your head around as a spectator. You know, we hear these drivers say, no, I've got more left in the tyres. And yes, they'll be looking at data that's coming from other teams as well. But when you've become the longest running driver on that compound, you're now that person. So you don't have anyone else you kind of head into an unknown, right? Once you extend past whatever everybody else has done on a set. So yes, they would have looked at other drivers' data and kind of seeing what's happening to their pace. But it's also what you feel in the car. And again, this is so hard to try and empathize with because we've never done it. But he said, he's like, I could feel the tires rather than falling away. They were getting quicker and quicker. Once we'd hit that mark of when, it was kind of your pit window, they just kept getting quicker. And to me, that's a quality in a driver that I'm not sure everybody who's racing has, that ability to actually kind of feel what's going on. And love or hate George Russell, it's something that he says that he has been trying to work on since he, kind of got out of Williams, really, is being able to better understand and then make a decision based on what he can feel in the car, which I think is really fascinating because it's such an opaque and complex thing to wrap your head around. And to me, to be able to trust that and make the call, it's brave, you're willing to take a risk, even up the front, which would be very easy to say, no, let's not risk it because there's too much at stake. I would have completely understood that too. So I think to take that gamble, high risk, high reward. So I think that was actually really impressive from him as a driver, and his team obviously completely supported him and trusted what he could feel in that moment, which was great to see. And to have that disqualification you can only imagine, is absolutely heartbreaking to hear that afterwards. You've done the podium, you've done your celebrating, you're talking to the team, and then you hear that news. Like, it's just gut-wrenching. I think he said, look, I'm really proud to have crossed the line first, but it is what it is. And Toto has kind of apologised to George Russell on behalf of the team because obviously this is not his fault. It's nothing that he could possibly have known. I don't think, from what I've seen, anything has come out in terms of like the technical side of things of where that weight came from, basically.
It was in the fuel.
Right. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, but whereabouts in the car is that weight, coming away from? Like, it doesn't really make sense to me yet. But it could be a combination of, plank or whatever wearing down. I don't know. But it would be interesting to understand where that actually comes from in the end, because 1.5 kilos. And the thing is, I think it's very easy in these situations to say, well, it wouldn't have made that much of a difference. Well, I'm sorry, at the paces that they're going at, it makes a difference. It absolutely does. And everybody has the same rules. And that is the type of thing that, it was a great win. It was an incredibly demanding race. But like I said, the time between first and third was 1.1 second, which is one of the closest races we've had forever. That is the exact type of thing that could give a car an edge, especially it's like, as it's coming through an exit or, able to get certain grip, whatever, like that is, we're talking about a sport of millimeters here. So it is really important, but gutted for him. I will say, Lewis Hamilton, I quite like Lewis, but I don't think he annoyed me this weekend. Well, I think, and it's partially because he got treated by a bit of a bratty Lando Norris last weekend. And then this weekend, he kind of did a bit of the same. And I was like, come on, mate. And to be fair, he wasn't the one criticising Lando Norris. I was. But when somebody said to him, did his comments in the cool down room bother you? He said, no, look, they don't bother me. I remember when I was in my mid-20s and I said and did things that I would now approach differently. But then went and behaved like that this weekend. Now, it wasn't as bad. It's just one of those slightly snarky, could have done better. You're more mature than that. You're better than that, Lewis. That's more where I'm coming from.
I did not used to be a fan of Lewis at all, but over the last doing this podcast, I've turned completely 180. I've got a hell of a lot of respect for him as a driver, for the hoo-ha that he puts up with off track and all the garbage that comes with it, the clothes he wears. He puts a lot of it on himself. You know, he wins that race in Silverstone, and it's clearly emotional. First win since he got shafted from that World Championship. He was humble. He was congratulative to everybody, and you could see the spirit of who he was and his happiness and joy coming out. But then last night you see it, and it's just like, mate, if you nailed this 10% better than what you did, no one would be griping about you in the way they do sometimes. Now, I'm a Lewis fan. He's awesome. He does things in the car that amaze me at times, and
agreed.
Yeah, it's a 1%, and that to me is just, I don't really give a shit, but it's a bit of a kick in the teeth sometimes. You go, oh, he's gone back to old Lewis. So he's going to Ferrari next year, and I'll tell you what, if he wins a world championship at Ferrari, for the first person to do it since Kimi Räikkönen in 2009, I think, geez, that is the legacy. Well, that is the legacy that man. That's the legacy he's chasing, and he'll be immortalised. He already is immortalised in the sport, but that's the cherry on top. So that concludes our race review. Driver of the day, Freya.
My driver of the day, I think he's got to get this, because he doesn't get the win. He's going to go to George Russell.
Yeah, absolutely, him for me. I'd put Oscar in there as a close second, but I think the way he managed those tyres on that one stopper was excellent. All right, our fantasy name competition. Angus H, Hungary Badger, very good. Daniel Blackman, Spa, say no more. Hillary, our favourite, don't worry, be Sparpy. Very, very, very good. If you haven't seen her hat, check out the new hat that she's got that Lakeside Drivers partnered with. I can't remember who it is, but
Lockdown.
Very, very cool. She's done a selfie online. Very good. Lockdown. Excellent. Mine's in the mail delivery, so I haven't seen it yet. And I can confirm that we may be doing a green beanie with a Lakeside Drive at some stage. And Freya, we're going to get some headbands too, just to prop you up as well. So that's exciting. And
Lakeside Drive turned millinery business.
Yeah, that's it. We won't get that famous designer who did that. The women's Formula One car design. Anyway, Nicholas Hales, summer break depression, absolutely, it's upon us. It'll be there. Our fantasy team, not that me and Freya have checked, we're very even, because I suspect we've very much got the same team. James, actually, he stumped us both. He's on 46, and
when
I was 80th. Freya,
you mean I'm ahead of you?
I mean, Freya, you're 2 places ahead of me, so, you know, you got 80 and I got 78. The Belgium team names top.
You got 80. Oh my goodness. Happy.
Sorry.
Trying all sorts of tricks here. You're not going to get away with it.
I'm trying to get to it. The Belgium top 3 was Rock and Stroll, Anthony Barden, Hasta la Vista, baby, Susan Coe, and Bronny team 2. Come on, Bronwyn Collier, get that name a bit better than what you've done, but very well. What do we got up next? Summer holidays. Well, it's going to be an interesting break, isn't it? Well, I'm not looking forward to it. We've just had a triple header, a break, and then two races on the trot. This has been the best 6 weeks of Formula One I can remember in a long time, and I cannot wait for it to come back. What are you looking forward to over the break, Frat?
Look, especially we're coming back for Zandvoort. I love that track. I love the setting, obviously right on the beach. It's going to be an interesting race. And as Daniel Ricciardo said, I don't know what car I'll have at Zandvoort. I just know that I'll have one. So it's going to be a couple of weeks of tense, sitting and waiting around anybody who's a Lakeside Drive listener. We know that you feel the same way, and that we're all in this together when it comes to trying to be patient. But no, look, I'm just so glad that we're going into the summer break on a high, and that we're kind of going to be chomping at the bit for the next race. It's not always like that, and I'm just thrilled about it.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a few weeks break as well on this podcast, much deserved for us. I think we're going to do a mid-season that'll be coming to you in a couple of weeks anyway. So we'll do one podcast in between now and then, mid-season review recap. James will be back from his holiday or being around the paddocks of the world that he is. So do us a favour in the meantime. Share this podcast with a mate. Join our fantasy league. Discord's always good. We still have our call-in via our website that you can do, which I'm looking forward to some Hills hot takes over the hot break with our American correspondent. Check us out on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Like and subscribe and leave a review or comment for us. That is always helps out the algorithms of which we are a slave to. So thank you very much, listener. We will be back. It's exciting, and thanks for joining us on this episode of Lakeside Drive.